Today we are going to do a tool called the law of hazard. The law of hazard says that all actions have intended and unintended consequences. Actions have intended and unintended consequences. To understand that, let's look at what happens when you take an action. So here is the focus of intent. This is what you wish to do, the focus of intent. And these here, these are the intended consequences. This is what you intend to happen. But the reality, though, is that the actual action you take is a bit larger than the focus of intent. This is the scope of impact. This is the action you took, and as a result, you have unintended consequences. So that's the focus of intent, what you would like to do. This is the intended consequences, what you would like to happen. But the action you take is a little broader than the focus of intent. The scope of impact casts a bigger shadow and has unintended consequences in addition to the intended consequences. The law of hazard says you can't avoid it. Actions will have intended and unintended consequences. What could you do about that? Well, there are things you could do, but let me tell you three ways not to deal with the law of hazard. 3 ways that people deal with them, and it probably doesn't work very well. First is pretense. Pretense, where you pretend that the unintended consequences were not unintended. You actually intended them as well. You pretend this. You act as if all of these is what you wanted to happen. You know, so when the actions occur, consequences occur, you pretend as if these were intended. You know, you might say something like, to the extreme, oh, you mean 3 people died? Oh, sure, yeah, right. I had expected I was going to allow 3 people to die. Obviously, you didn't expect anybody to die, but some casualties occurred. These are unintended consequences. Face them. Face the fact that they are unintended consequences. The second way not to deal with unintended consequences is exhaustive search, where before you take the action, you exhaustively analyze what possible unintended consequences could occur and how you might minimize those unintended consequences, and analyze all of that before you take any action whatsoever. You know what the result is? The result is no action at all, analysis paralysis. So you end up taking no action whatsoever. The third bad way of dealing with the law of hazard is rationalization. This is where you argue that the positive value of the intended consequences far outweigh the adverse effect of the unintended consequences. That on in the larger scheme of things, the algebraic sum of the positive value of the intended consequences and the negative value of the unintended consequences, they add up to a positive amount, and that therefore you justify the action. See, this is rationalization. You know you didn't intend for these unintended consequences. Accept it. Recruit your naysayers. Ask people, how do I adjust the scope of impact so that I minimize or eliminate the unintended consequences? Enroll them in helping you do that. Enroll them in narrowing the scope of impact. That's a much better way to deal with the law of hazard. The law of hazard occurs at all levels. It occurs in small actions It occurs in big actions. It occurs in the actions of a manager of a department, occurs in the actions of a CEO. In fact, a great example is the Stuxnet virus. The Stuxnet virus, which was a very secret activity by the intelligence agencies of both the US and the Israeli government, where we sent out a virus into Iran's nuclear machinery. We sent a virus that would go and take control of the centrifuges in their enrichment of uranium and slow down the centrifuges while maintaining to the operator as if the centrifuges were operating at the full speed. We figured that by slowing down the centrifuges, they won't be able to build enriched uranium, while the operators were all thinking everything is going okay. Well, they figured it out. What was the unintended consequence there? Here's the unintended consequence. Now that they got that virus, they look at it, analyze it, they can figure out how to actually build a similar virus to attack us. Clearly, that wasn't our intended consequence, that's an unintended consequence. You see, unlike a bomb which destroys itself when you use it, a virus, if captured, reveals itself. So, the unintended consequence of a Stuxnet virus is in fact their capability to actually send the same kind of virus into our domain. When you take actions, understand what are unintended consequences, the law of hazard, and face those unintended consequences and ask your people, how can we narrow the scope of impact so that it is closer to the focus of intent? The law of hazard, all actions have intended and unintended consequences.